Hi everyone, welcome to or welcome back to my channel. This is Rebel Ramblings. So I'm going to be continuing my series today where I talk about various fictional characters and I discuss what I think their Myers-Briggs type is, or their MBTI type. So for those of you who are new to my channel or who don't know what Myers-Briggs is, I do have a video where I go over in depth what it all means and the history of it and everything, but just for a quick overview, Myers-Briggs is a personality typing system. It is based in the psychological research of Carl Jung. Basically, Myers-Briggs is a system of exploring and explaining the way in which people interact with society and with the world. So there are 16 different choices. Each personality type is made up of 4 letters, and within each of those 4 letters you have one of 2 options, which is how you get the 16. So if you want to learn more, you can check out my video on it where I go more in depth about that. So yeah, before we get started, if you are interested in this series or maybe any other videos that you'd like to hear me make, please do subscribe to my channel, like this video, comment down below. If there's a fictional character you're interested in hearing me do a Myers-Briggs type, some other issue pertaining to psychology or storytelling or media that you are interested in hearing my opinion on, comment that below as well. So for today, I'm going to be typing Tohru Honda, who is the protagonist from the manga/anime Fruits Basket. I do have a video where I typed Yuki Soma, so if you want to check that out, you can watch that. So my plan is to eventually type all of the characters in Fruits Basket. However, I am trying to hold off on typing some of the characters who have a lot more story yet to come as far as the anime goes, because I don't want to spoil too much for people who are only watching the anime. So I'm kind of starting with the characters that, although there is still more growth to come for everyone, you know a good chunk of their backstory and enough of their character arc has already occurred where I won't necessarily be spoiling anything drastic. So if you are only watching the anime and you haven't read the manga, I will do my best to not spoil anything that hasn't happened in the anime so far, but I will put a spoiler warning just in case, because I might accidentally hint at something or mention something that hasn't really been discussed, just because it's hard to analyze a person when you know what's coming and you're trying to forget the growth that is ahead. This was a fun typing. I went back and forth on quite a few things, so if you have any opinions on it, please do share in the comments below. So because Tohru is a fictional character, of course, there's no correct answer because she's not a real person. So it is quite possible that you can completely disagree with me on any or all of the things that I say. If you do, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your opinion on all of this. Alright, so the first letter of the 4 is the E versus the I, which is the introvert versus the extrovert. So I always, when I'm approaching this typing, I usually try to take a step back because oftentimes introvert, extrovert seems like the easiest one because it's the one you can see the most often about a person. Like you can kind of meet someone for 5 seconds and have a pretty good guess if they're an introvert or an extrovert. However, I think it's really important to note that introvert and extrovert is not the same as outgoing and shy. You can be an outgoing introvert and a shy extrovert. So it is important to kind of think twice, not just jump to your initial conclusion. So my initial thought with Tohru was that she was an extrovert, and I came to that conclusion basically because she is always happy to socialize with other people. She always is happy to have anyone over. You know, people can randomly be like, oh, I'm coming to dinner tonight. She's like, okay, great, more the merrier. As opposed to, you can see very obviously with Yuki and Kyo that the notion of new people being at dinner that they hadn't planned for is exhausting for them, and they're not always happy. Even if it's people that they like, their friends, they're not always happy to have people in their space, whereas Tohru never seems put out by having anyone there. She is very fast to make friends, to socialize with people, and all this stuff. And of course, that doesn't inherently make someone an extrovert. I actually had to think about it for a minute. Sometimes it's hard with protagonists because one of the ways that you can determine if someone's an introvert or an extrovert is that extroverts tend to process out loud, whereas introverts tend to process internally. But protagonists, you often hear their thoughts, so it feels like they're processing out loud, but they're actually processing in their mind. And this was something that I wasn't sure about with Tohru, and I had to kind of go back and forth because a lot of her own issues, like her sadness from having lost her parents and any other struggles that she might be going with, feeling like she's a burden, not knowing how to deal with any of those kinds of things, she doesn't necessarily talk about that out loud. She talks about that in voiceover in the anime / in thought bubbles in the manga, and because you're reading it from her point of view, you might forget that that isn't being said out loud. However, I kind of came to a conclusion, two elements of this that helped me make my determination to keep her as an extrovert. One was that I think that the reason she doesn't process out loud isn't because she isn't an oral processor, but more that she's worried about burdening people with her problems and putting other people out, so she kind of overrides her instinct to discuss her problems out loud so she doesn't burden other people. Because she very much likes to discuss other people's problems out loud. She's very happy to help someone else process their feelings, and when she's talking to someone who is an introvert, like Yuki or Hiro, and they have their problems that they're definitely dealing with internally, Tohru will likely vocalize them. The other reason that I came to the conclusion that she was an extrovert was because even when she's in her room, thinking in her own mind, processing her own problems to herself, she very often does it, pretty much always does it, as a conversation with her mother, or she might even literally speak out loud to the photograph of her mother. And of course, there is an element of this is a storytelling device, because it is a way for us to hear her thoughts. But I think because other characters don't necessarily do that, it makes me think it's less so just that's the author's way of telling the story, and more so that is Tohru's way of processing. So I am pretty certain that she is an extrovert, although if someone were to say she was an outgoing introvert, I could see where they were coming from, but I do think that extrovert is the conclusion. So the second letter is the N versus the S, which is intuitive versus sensing. This one I was back and forth on with Tohru. So generally speaking, people who are Ns are more likely to see the big picture of things. They kind of have a feeling for things. They don't have to see all the facts. They just can kind of like interpret stuff. They're more likely to be forgiving because they're more likely to kind of believe there's more to the story than what they see. On the other hand, S's tend to be more about their senses. So they process what they see, think, feel, hear, touch, and taste. So I was back and forth on this one quite a bit. I kind of came to the conclusion that she was an S, sensing, and these were my reasons why. So I could see her as an N because she definitely is very apt to assume she doesn't know the whole story, and she's often looking for there to be more to the story than she can see. So if somebody comes up to her and they're rude, her assumption is not, oh, that's a rude person. Her assumption is, there's probably more going on to this behind the scenes with this person that I'm not aware of, so therefore I'm just going to assume that they're a nice person having a bad day, which in theory could be much more of an N trait than an S trait, but I believe in Tohru's case specifically, this is somewhat of a trained behavior. So my conclusion with that is that her mother was an N, because a lot of that processing that Tohru does that makes her come to the conclusion to see the best in people and to always look for the story behind the story and to try to be more intuitive about people often comes in the form of, this is a story or something that I learned from my mother that I'm going to apply to this situation. So I think that it's not necessarily that Tohru doesn't have the instinct to trust people or to think better of people, but she does have those tools to think like an N that she learned from her mother. On the other hand, however, I still do think she's an S because she still has to see something to actually understand it, to actually come to that conclusion. So, for example, like when somebody is offish, she's in her mind likely to say, oh, I learned from my mother that this person is probably having a bad day and they're not actually a bad person. But she's not able to figure out what is causing that person to actually act that way until it is more explicitly shown to her. So I think one of the really good examples of this is like when she meets Hiro and he's really bratty and he's rude to her and he's very offish, and she is obviously upset by this and she thinks he doesn't like her, but there's also that part of her that's saying, oh, well, I'm probably just not seeing the full story. I'm sure he doesn't actually not like me and just probably something else going on with him. And of course, it's easy for her to come to that realization because she's known enough of the Somas to know that they all have their own stuff going on and they all have a lot of trauma that they're dealing with. So she does continuously remind herself of that, but she still has to continuously remind herself. Her first instinct is to still assume he doesn't like her. Also, even though she's pretty well determined that there's something else going on with Hiro and it's not just that he's a brat and doesn't like her, she still has to wait until Hiro accidentally slips up and actually reveals that he feels inferior, that he feels jealous, that he is mad at himself for not being able to protect Kisa, for her to finally come to the conclusion. She's like, oh, I get it now. This is the problem all along. But she didn't get it until he said it, or at least said a little bit of the story. So that does make me think that she is an S, even if she has the training from her mother, who was an N, to look for something beneath the surface that she can't find herself, or that she can't see clearly in front of her. Another thing, and this is kind of a little bit more silly, but I think it's interesting that Tohru is so bad at guessing people's zodiac signs. This is a thing that comes up a few times where she'll meet a new member of the zodiac and the rest of the family will be like, oh, can you guess this person's animal, like which animal they are? And she never ever guesses it. Sometimes, like for example, when she meets Kagura and they're all like, oh, I bet you can guess her type, and oh, it's pretty obvious, right? She never guesses it until Kagura accidentally runs into the mailman and transforms. And another example is when she meets Hattori, and Momiji makes a comment like, oh, I'm sure you'll be able to figure out his type really quickly. It's so obvious. And again, Tohru never figures it out until she actually sees him transform. And I feel like that's maybe not an S versus N thing, but because some of the characters have those elements of their animal personality, especially Kagura is a pretty obvious example. She's very much like her boar character. That Toru's never able to pick up on any of that, and she has no guesses whatsoever unless it's explicitly shown in front of her. And in fact, the only person zodiac that she kind of guesses right is in reverse. She guesses that Ritsu is Ritsu. Not necessarily that Ritsu is a monkey, because she's already been told by Ritsu's mother to look out for him and that he is the monkey, and then she's able to see that Ritsu is so much like his mother that she's able to realize it's him. But even that, it's like really obvious in your face, and she's also been given almost all of the hints to begin with to even be able to come to that conclusion. Alright, so the third letter is the T versus the F, which is thinking versus feeling. So this is kind of like the T's tend to be head over heart, and the F's tend to be heart over head. This was probably like one of the easier ones for me. I feel like Tohru is definitely an F. She is pretty much all heart. She's pretty much about how things feel and about like doing the right thing based on emotion and that kind of stuff. So she's not as much about logic. She doesn't necessarily think the logical conclusions through things. She determines it based on her heart. And I think that this is shown well in the folk tale that Momiji tells about the fool that basically gives his entire body to people. And of course that story is related to being about a person who's similar to Tohru. And I think in that it's pretty obvious that she's willing to give whatever of herself because it feels good and it makes other people feel good, and she doesn't think through the logical conclusions of like, this isn't the right, necessarily the smart choice. Like even her spending all of her money to buy chocolates for the Soma clan and stuff like that. like very feel versus thinking. So yeah, Tohru is pretty much all heart. So the fourth and final letter is the J versus the P, which is judging versus perceiving. So this one is a little bit harder to kind of like explain because the names aren't explicit. But basically, judging is kind of people who are more orderly. They like to have like a to-do list. They have tasks they like to get done. They think before they act, that whole thing. Perceiving tend to be a little bit more go with the flow. They tend to do things on the fly, a little bit more impulsive. Don't necessarily have plans, don't necessarily have organizational skills, and just a little bit more free flow with that whole thing. So for this, although I don't think that Tohru is very, very stringent in her planning, because she's happy to have, people pop up out of the blue to join for dinner, like I'd said before. It doesn't really faze her. She's happy to change her plans. Oh, we're going here instead? Okay, that's fine. And that whole stuff. So she's not like a very stringent J, but I do think she's a J. I think this because she's very organized. She likes to keep things. She keeps items from her childhood. She keeps her mother's picture, like, always with her. She has things in their place. She's very good at cleaning, which of course is not necessary to be a J, but I think that her J does help in that way. And she's never bothered by organizing and cleaning. It's like almost like a game to her of sorts. Like, she enjoys it. She enjoys household chores, and even though her job is literally cleaning, she also is happy to come home and clean more and doesn't ever bother her. So that would be my interpretation, is that she is a J because she does tend to be organized. She does tend to think before she acts. Alright, so that would put us as an ESFJ. So ESFJs enjoy supporting their friends and loved ones, organizing social gatherings, and doing their best to make sure everyone is happy. They're altruistic, take seriously their responsibility to help and do the right thing. They love to be of service, enjoy any role that allows them to participate in a meaningful way, so long as they know that they are valued and appreciated. Conscientious helpers, sensitive to the needs of others, energetically dedicated to their responsibilities, and eager to please and provide. Generous with their time, effort, and emotions, often take on the concerns of others as if they were their own. So I think that this describes Tohru pretty well. She's always happy to help. She's always happy to be there as a support system, whether you just want someone to sit with you in silence, whether you want to discuss your problems, whether you want someone to kind of ignore you from your problems and give you something fun to do in the meantime. She's always there to help. She loves being of service. She doesn't like feeling like she's not helpful. She doesn't like feeling like she's a burden. Definitely would say she's energetically dedicated. I think that's a really good description of Tohru. She's always very excited to get in there and get work done, regardless of whose work it is. She's happy to clean up a mess no matter who made the mess, that kind of stuff. I think she's definitely altruistic. She definitely sees the best in everything. She thinks the world is a good place. So yeah, generous with her time, effort, and emotions. I would say she's definitely very generous. She never seems put out by anything. Tohru was very impressive. I wish I was more like her sometimes, honestly. I think she's a really, really great friend to have. Or I wish I had a friend like her. That would be nice too. So yeah, that is my typing of Tohru Honda, ESFJ. If you agree with my typing, disagree with my typing, have some opinions or discussions on it, please do comment down below. I would love to hear what you think about it. Like I said, there were a few that I really had to think about with this one. This one didn't come as obviously to me as some of the other Myers-Briggs typings do. So if you disagree, please let me know. I would love to hear that. If you're curious to hear me do more of these videos, please do subscribe to my channel. If there's any character that you particularly want to hear me type, whether they're from Fruits Basket, from another anime, from something completely different like Star Wars or anything like that, superheroes, I'm a fan of most things, so comment down below. If I don't know the character, I'll still try to do some research on it, but if I know the character, I will definitely be happy to do that video. So yeah, basically I hope you enjoyed. Make sure that you guys are staying safe, staying healthy, wearing a mask in public, all that jazz, and I will see you next time. Bye.